Thank you so much for being here today for the President's Chat. We met at a business workshop where you told me about your journey, how you wanted to turn your experiences with postnatal depression into a play to create more awareness.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is a bilingual sci-fi play, AI May.
Mm-hmm.
And you highlight depression, mental health, overcoming grief, and you help others to find words to talk about these topics.
Mm-hmm.
And I understand that your play is also about second generation trauma.
Mm-hmm.
And you share your message by connecting the Asian community.
Mm-hmm.
So there's lots of different facets. And I was hoping you could tell us a bit more about your journey.
Sure. Thank you, Era, for giving me a chance to share my experience of how I manage my postnatal depression, my experience of dealing with grief, and how I managed to use AI May, my original play, to actually raise awareness on these topics through conversations that I have with audiences and people interested in these subjects. So I was a journalist. I am a mother of 2 young children. I was born in Taiwan, raised in New Zealand, and now I live and work in Australia. So for a very long time, I had to deal with sort of being caught between the Asian culture and the Western culture. So raised to be westernized, but then still having to deal with a lot of cultural expectations from the Asian community as a migrant. And as a result, when I had my first child, I had a lot of sort of differences with my mother-in-law, who's still very traditional, and then probably hormonal change as well. So I suffered from postnatal depression for 8 years. And at once I had suicidal thoughts, and I had panic attacks and all of that. So when I reached rock bottom, at one stage, I was thinking of, oh, this is just not worth, living a life like this, living for other people. But then I discovered theatre. I discovered acting and writing. And from there onwards, I decided to use my own experience to write a story that touches on all these things that I struggled with for many years. And I want to actually use these as healthy conversation starters for people, not just Asian, but people who are not comfortable with talking about mental health, to actually not see it as a stigma or a taboo, but just something that, we all experience at some point in our lives. And I want to use it as an experience to empower people.
Yeah. And you manage cultural differences, how that's impacted how postnatal depression affected you. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah. So for example, for a lot of Australian women, you probably, after giving birth to your child, you would prepare to go back to work and then send your baby maybe to a childcare service. A lot of people do that. And that was also my plan, because I was a very career-minded woman, very ambitious as a journalist. My career was going well. But my parents-in-law, they are very traditional Malaysian Chinese. So they were trying to talk me into doing things the traditional Chinese way, as in looking after the children and then following traditional female roles based on, patriarchy. And that was very hard for me, because I felt like my individuality, my happiness, my joy were all suppressed, and that I was not allowed to live the life that I wanted. And then I had to exist for other people as a mother, as a wife, as a daughter-in-law. So these labels became who I was at the time. And I didn't know who I was apart from these labels. And that was just very, very difficult, that I just didn't enjoy life anymore. And that was the beginning of my postnatal depression.
Yeah. What got you through the postnatal depression? What helped?
Well, so in the beginning, I couldn't sleep. So I had insomnia for maybe a couple of years. I had a lot of internal dialogues with my mother-in-law because I was too afraid to confront her with my different ideas for raising my own children. They were very sort of forthcoming in how they wanted us to raise their grandchildren. And that was very hard for me because I was still trying to be a good Chinese daughter-in-law, filial piety, being obedient, not talking back and all of that. But then, anyway, it was very hard. And I was just sad, tired all the time, and I couldn't sleep. So I thought something was wrong. And I went to see my GP, and we did a little survey. And then he told me that I had depression. And I think it was kind of like, sort of more on the serious side. And it was a shock to my system because raised as Asian, when you think about people with mental health issues or depression, it's like a taboo, right? Like you kind of go, oh, that person has depression, or something must be wrong with their brain or whatever. And you kind of see them as an outsider and you don't know how to talk to them. You see them like a broken object or something like that. So when I was labeled as having clinical depression, that was very hard for me. It was like, wow, like I was a journalist and I had interviewed people about it, but nothing sort of really educated me to the extent of actually having to go through this experience myself. So I was lucky that I had a very compassionate GP. So he listened to me, right? Because when I was telling my family about all my issues, they were always like, toughen up, something's wrong with you, you are too weak. So they made you seem like it was your fault. It was your fault to feel miserable about life, to have depression. Whereas the doctor didn't judge me. He just listened. He gave me space. And his eyes looked into my eyes compassionately, as if he understood, and that my misery was accepted by my GP. And so I knew that I wasn't making things up. There wasn't anything wrong with me, that I wasn't sort of having, illusions about having depression or whatever because I couldn't cope with life. And so I felt validated. And that immediately took away half of the pain that I was suffering from. And I just remember crying in front of him and then just feeling so embraced and so held by his compassion, something that I'll always remember. And then from there onwards, actually seeking professional support, seeing psychologists, coaches, that kind of thing. And then just started to take care of my own needs, what I needed, and actually just moving on from there bit by bit.
Yeah, because often people find it hard to know exactly what to say to somebody who suffers from a depression. And so for you, it's very clear that just having that non-judgmental listening, compassionate conversation, that is something that really made a difference for you.
Yes, it did. And to be honest, as a journalist, I had interviewed people with depression before. And I always felt like I had to, sort of tread on eggshells because I didn't know how to talk to someone with depression. And then when I became that person, I was like, wow, going through all the difficulties and then overcoming, the stigma that I myself experienced, all these things. When I became sort of brave enough, well enough, I wanted to share my experience so that people didn't have to feel so bad about having depression themselves because it's so common. But I just wasn't ready because I didn't want to be judged. I didn't want to be seen as weak. And it took me 8 years until I was ready to actually share this experience on my own social media. I wanted to share how I overcame my depression. It doesn't go away. It never goes away, but you just learn how to manage it so that you don't fall into that deep, dark well. And so when I shared it, finally, I took the courage. It was so hard. I felt like my heart was bursting out. But when I finally did, I felt like a great sense of relief. And there were people who actually understood. And a lot of people reached out to me. And so I realized that, actually, a lot of my friends and contacts probably going through the same thing. But no one just ever sort of stood out to talk about it and normalize it. So when I did, I saw that some of my friends around me who actually saw themselves as lesser beings than others because they had mental health issues, they actually sort of felt okay. It's like, oh, you know, it's okay to be me. And so we could actually just relate with each other, empower each other.
Yeah, yeah. Because mental health issues definitely still is a big taboo, not just in the Asian community, also in the medical community. We know that a lot of doctors find it really hard to reach out and ask for help, and how amazed they often are the moment that they have that courage to reach out, how that actually is life-changing, and then they can finally be helped.
Yeah, I feel very sad, you know, because I know I've heard stories around me, especially with Asian doctors in other communities committing suicide, you know, too much stress and didn't feel like they belong. You know, they work so hard, but then their family relationships suffer, their work relationships suffer, you know, because they don't really have the time or the space to deal with the cultural differences. They're just like pretty much working like machines, but then still, you know, not feeling understood. Sometimes language barrier, sometimes cultural barrier. It's very, very difficult. And so from my own experience, I was kind of one of the first Asian faces on TV in New Zealand, Mandarin speaking migrant. And I felt this responsibility that I had to put on this face, and then I had to kind of represent my community in a very strong way, even though I was only a fresh graduate and I didn't know a lot of things. So I always had to put on a mask and pretend that I was very good, but I was actually really, really scared, you know, deep down. And so I think maybe a lot of doctors can perhaps relate with this experience. And it took me many years, you know, until I realized that you don't need to pretend, you know, you're just human beings. So for me as a patient, when I go and see doctors, I don't need you to be the best, you know, because I understand that doctors don't always have the answers, but I want you to care about me as a human being, you know, actually have a connection with me in the 15 minutes that you sit down in the consultation room with me. That means more than anything, because the GP that I talked about, who helped identify my depression, he was not deemed a good doctor by the medical circle. You know, a lot of people criticize him, but for me as a patient, you know, he was my savior. And I still remember till this day, you know, nearly 10 years later, that encounter we had.
Yeah, yeah. So that's a very strong message, how often for patients, having that connection with your doctor, feeling that compassion that they have for you is the most important thing. And you know that knowledge, they can look it up, they can ask for more knowledge, but that compassion is crucial.
Of course, because knowledge, you know, robots can do that for us. ChatGPT can do that for us, but they can never replace human beings to look you in your eyes and feel the energy, your state, and to actually give you compassion, give you some care. Because for me, I actually almost crumbled again during COVID. I had a burnout, which was not very helpful for my post-natal depression at the time. And so I actually, I used telehealth, and I connected with this female GP based in probably Melbourne or something like that. And obviously she was busy, but then she gave me her full attention, you know, in the short time that we were talking, compassionately listened to me, you know, and she didn't need to say a lot, really. I also had experience with a psychologist in the past where I went to see her, and every time I felt like she was lecturing me, she was trying to show how clever she was by teaching me all these like flight and fright, you know, modes, you know, blah blah. I didn't need that. I don't need you to give me all these theories or tell me what you did in your own life to overcome your own problems. I just need you to listen to me, see me as a person, acknowledge me, validate me, offer me some directions when I feel very lost. I don't need your theories. I don't need to see that you are very clever. Doctors are clever anyway. I don't need that. I just need you to know who I am, see me for who I am, you know, in the short time that we see each other. And I know that a lot of doctors are so busy, you know, like you are inundated with work. You are stressed, you are tired, you don't get to see your family. I know that, you know. So when you feel very tired and you don't feel like working, please take the space to look after yourself, you know. go to a beach, take a day off or something like that, then you're not going to crumble. You're going to have the space to love yourself, love your family, and really have meaningful connections with your patient. And sometimes that can be, so meaningful, even just a 5 minute sort of connection with your patient.
Wow, powerful message. Yes. So I would like to hear a little bit more about the play that you did, because it's not just the play, it's also the connection to the Asian community. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, so it's called AI May. So artificial intelligence may one day, this is a question that I'm posing to the audience. May is also the name of the girl at the center of the story who dies. And her mother, a 60-year-old Chinese migrant, she's not educated. She doesn't feel that she belongs in Australia, and she still holds on to very traditional Chinese values. So when she loses everything, her daughter, who she kind of attached a lot of her dreams and hopes to, then how does she deal with this loss, this sort of aging alone, in a very lonely, isolated situation in Australia? And so when artificial intelligence, a robot that looks like her daughter, comes into her life, what decisions does she make? Does it actually help mother open up where she wasn't able to open up to her own community? Because I experienced mental health issues, I knew how hard it is. And I also observe people like my own mother, my mother-in-law, all these people. I know that a lot of Asian migrants, they don't live a fulfilling life. They don't have good relationships with their children because they feel like they gave up so much, to go to a foreign country to sort of, start all over again just so that their children can succeed. And so there's a lot of expectations. It's like, I do all this for you. I expect you to treat me this way. I expect that you achieve this kind of a success. So in a way, the children almost become robot-like, and they don't actually end up, feeling loved. They don't feel held by their own parents. And so when they have their own families, a lot of them actually become sort of distanced from their own family. Sometimes, they become estranged, and that's so sad. I see that, I experience that. So I wanted to find an answer, but then I wanted to use this story in a very extreme situation to touch on how we deal with grief, how we deal with aging, how we deal with intergenerational trauma, as in, the difficulties we experience between generations, parents and children, and all of that. And it's bilingual. So I was actually sort of advised against making a bilingual play by English language playwrights. They're like, oh, the mainstream is not going to understand it. But then, what? To do that, I would have to dumb down the Mandarin language, of all my central characters. And so how can you actually truly understand, how can you truly understand another culture if they are dumbed down in the way they think and the way that they express themselves? So I wanted to represent it truthfully as well, bilingual with surtitles. So like watching an opera, you have surtitles, and you get to also see sort of the fluidity, the complexity of what goes on in the characters' minds. And I think that's the truth that we live in. And for Australia to truly become multicultural, accept one another so that we all feel belong, we need to embrace this this reality. And even if it's, a little bit inconvenient that you have to see the subtitles, or maybe sometimes you might miss the meaning, isn't that the reality of life? So so that's what I've been doing the last couple of years. I wrote this play countless times because I was not a playwright to begin with. I was a journalist, but I just really wanted to do this because of my own experience and my own challenges in mental health. And so I made a 10-minute version, which was shortlisted in an American 10-minute play festival. And so I self-funded a showcase in Brisbane, and I had some psychologists, bless them, Yan Ying and Dr. Peter Sherrock. They are psychologists who gifted their time to join our mental health panel discussion to talk to our audience about how do you cope with grief, how do you deal with intergenerational trauma. And you know, when I had this idea, I wasn't sure how it would go, but I just really wanted to do it. So I did it anyway. And I think the audience really loved it. And then so since then, I had held some online conversations around similar topics as well, which I think the Asian migrant women or women in Asia really appreciated.
Wow. So it really empowered you, and it also empowered those women around you that were able to see the play.
Yes, let me give you one extreme example. So I had an audience who came and watched my 10-minute play. And so she committed suicide twice, right? So she obviously has deep depression and she's all alone as a migrant. She doesn't feel fit, you know, she fit in, and then she feels that the whole world is against her. So her beloved pet, her sort of like a mother-child relationship died suddenly, and she couldn't cope that her hair actually went gray overnight. Her hair went gray overnight. And so when she saw that I was putting out a play about how to deal with grief, she came and watched it, right? She came and watched it. And then she emailed me. She's like, oh, please keep doing this. This is important, blah, blah. And so I wanted to kind of understand what her experience was like. So I invited her out for coffee and we had a connection. And so she donated $500 straight away towards my crowdfunding to make a longer play because she believed in it so much. And so when I actually was developing the longer play, I invited her to come and witness, observe the rehearsal process. And she was like, oh, I don't just want to, watch from the sideline. Can I actually also participate in the creative development process?
Yeah.
So she came. Okay. So I'm like, okay, well, you're not an actress, but that's okay. Come anyway, experience it. And we explored all these topics about grief and all that. And I could see that in the beginning, she was always almost crumbling, just, like really locked in her grief. But then slowly, she released a lot of those pain and she became lighter and she became happier. And she became a volunteer as well for our longer piece, which I put out in December last year.
Oh, wow. Yeah. So it was like a therapeutic experience for her as well.
I think so.
Yeah. Yeah. And you're currently crowdfunding for a longer play?
Yes. So well, I'm 41 this year, right? So it was it was a gutsy decision for me to give up my journalism career because I could have gone to Sydney and I could have gone on TV, but this is just way more important. So I actually shoved all that aside just so I can concentrate on making this play. And I self-funded the first 10-minute version and then the 90-minute version. So and then with a bit of crowdfunding in between, not too much. But now after, I don't know, more than 40 rewrites and 2 iterations, actual shows, I'm ready to put out a professional enhanced version of the story. Like I want it to be so good that it can be a global conversation for any community. I want it to be like that.
Yeah.
And I realized that, oh my God, I actually need at least $150,000 to put that out. So I'm like, anyway, but I'm crowdfunding and I'm finding ways to make it happen. So in the meantime, I'm just kind of working on enhancing my script of the final version of AI Made based on audience feedback from our recent work in progress showing.
Well, we will make sure to put the link to the crowdfunding page in the introduction of this conversation.
Thank you.
I want to thank you very much for your time today, for your courage, for sharing your story with us. I know it's not always easy, and but I think you are a very good example of how overcoming your own barriers and showing your vulnerabilities, reaching out to others, how powerful that can be and how therapeutic that can be. And I think you're a great example for anyone from the Asian community, but basically everyone who finds it hard to struggle with psychological problems and depression.
Thank you so much, Era, for giving me this opportunity to share my thoughts. My final thoughts, if I can just share something. I think as women working in the medical field, you all work very, very hard. You know, you have to juggle so many things at once, especially if you're a daughter, or especially if you're a mother, or you are a partner, you know. And I just want you to know that when things get hard, you are absolutely allowed to take a moment, an hour, a day off, and then just go and do nothing. If you want to cry, or if you just want to shop like crazy, or you just want to, I don't know, scream, you know, to the ocean or whatever, you're allowed. Or just go and have some party or have some fun, you know, and just celebrate. Go, hey, I've worked so hard and I just deserve a moment just for myself. And then after that, you'll be recharged and you're ready to go back again.
I deserve a moment. I think that's a very important message. Thank you so much, Amy.